Hello and welcome back to the queerest podcast telling the fiercest stories. This is Queer Talker and I'm Ben Cicchetti. This week I sit down with England's first openly gay MP and the world's first openly gay cabinet minister, my first Lord on Queer Talker, Lord Christopher Smith.
I remember writing a very boring speech on the train, and as I walked up to take my place on the platform, I just thought, this is the place to do it. I can remember having to sit through the most dreadful, offensive, horrible speeches from some of the supporters of Section 28. I dialed this number, it was a South African number, and picking up the phone at the other end was Nelson Mandela. And that, I think, was the moment when I thought perhaps a career in public life has been worth it after all.
Chris, we will start with our Queer Panic rapid fire questions. And so you just respond with the first thing that comes to your mind, which is, what is your favorite queer movie?
Call Me By Your Name.
Brilliant choice. Timothée Chalamet. Fantastic. How about a TV show, queer TV show you recommend to everyone?
It's a Sin.
Excellent choice. How about, I can see a lot of books behind you. So what about a queer book that you recommend to everyone having on the shelves?
Armistead Maupin. It would have to be. I grew up with all of his tales of San Francisco, and they are a pure delight.
Amazing. Okay, I love that choice. Who's your ultimate queer icon?
It would probably have to be Ian McKellen. But the world is full of ultimate queer icons, but that would probably be the one that I would choose.
Yeah, an incredible individual, incredible trendsetter, and trailblazer for a lot of us. Who is one person you would like to hear on this podcast?
I'm tempted to say Ian McKellen. I think you also ought to ask Wahid Ali to come on. First openly gay member of the House of Lords. He preceded me by a long way in the House of Lords. He has also, of course, not just been a successful businessman, but he's had to tussle with being a Muslim and queer, and that's something you could explore with him.
Definitely. I love that. We discuss intersectionality a lot on this podcast, so I think that'd be an incredibly interesting conversation. Is there a moment in your political career that you are most proud of?
It would probably be the moment that I achieved my long-held ambition to make all the national museums and galleries free for everyone. It took me 4 years to achieve. It actually happened about 2 months after I had stopped being Secretary of State. But the Science Museum invited me back to come and cut a ribbon and throw open the doors. And we had a lovely little ceremony. And about half an hour later, I was wandering around in the foyer of the museum, and this young man carrying his little daughter on his shoulders was making a beeline towards me. And as he came up to me, he turned his face to his daughter and he said, "I want you to say thank you to this man. It's because of him we're able to be here today." And that, I think, was the moment when I thought perhaps a career in public life has been worth it after all.
That is amazing. What an incredible, incredible legacy that so many of us have now been able to enjoy because of you.
And still in place, of course, remarkably.
Yeah. Long may it. Long may
Yeah.
it. What is one word you would use to describe your childhood?
Um, Calm. I grew up in a very loving home. My mother was a teacher, my father was a civil servant. They looked after me really well. Um, they did not initially respond terribly well to me coming out publicly, but within 2 years, they were inviting my then boyfriend, to come and stay. So they they came round to it after a while.
Yeah, that's amazing. Wow. Well, we've warmed up a little bit our queer panic questions. So we'll get a bit deeper because you said calm. And I have this theory that to understand an LGBTQ plus person as an adult, you do first need to understand them as a young person. So what should I know about you as a child or a teenager to understand the Chris that sits in front of me today?
Um, the one thing I would say is it took me a very long time to realize that I was gay.
Mm.
Um, so it was probably into my 20s when the realization dawned. Um, uh, but uh, through the whole of my teenage years, I grew up in Scotland, and I loved roaming the Scottish hills and the Scottish countryside, and living in Edinburgh was a complete delight. Um, but it took me time to realize that I was gay.
Yeah. I mean, Edinburgh, it looks phenomenal. I've never been, and it's on my list of go-to places that I need to go to. I
It
want to go and
it
enjoy Christmas there. I feel
it
like it'd be
it
incredibly
it
festive.
should be very high up on your list of go-to places.
Yeah.
Wonderful city.
I'll make it happen for sure. So if you think about that experience then, do you remember the first LGBTQ plus person you became aware of, either in real life or just through the news and media?
When I was a student at Cambridge, I was very closeted, um, but there was one figure who was really open about themselves, and um, uh, uh, camp would be the obvious word that would come to mind, but I was sort of aware of him, but I didn't really know him. Um, it was then subsequently in my 20s that I began to get to know and fall in love with gay people, and um, I began to lead a very open life at that stage.
Yeah, that's incredible. I often think it's interesting to understand. Do you remember so many of us can have a memory of that first time we felt the queerness within us, whether it's because we saw something or we got exposed to something that made us kind of feel something inside. Do you remember that first feeling you got that you may be queer?
Um, yes, and it was when I saw really attractive men, and thought, yeah, this is how I want to express myself into the future. Um, and that was probably when I was still a student.
Yeah. Well, you also then went on to have an incredible career in politics, as we talked about. What was your journey into politics, and was it always kind of your aspiration as you went through school and university, or did something along your journey kind of spark that path for you?
But remember, I grew up in the 1960s, and this was a time of real hope and optimism, and we all thought we could change the world, and that politics and democratic decision making was the way to do it. And I went into politics because I wanted to change the world, and I thought that politics was the way to do it. Um, and so from the time I left university onwards, I went to work for housing associations and housing cooperatives, building houses
Yeah.
for people around London and the southeast. Um, but I wanted to get involved in politics, and I was first of all elected to be a councillor in Islington Borough Council, where I lived, and then I became the candidate eventually for Islington South and Finsbury as a parliamentary seat.
Yeah, and obviously, famously, in 1984, you stood on a stage at a rally in Rugby and you came out publicly as gay. That moment made you Britain's first openly gay male MP. What gave you the courage to do that, right? Because it was a different time. So, what gave you the courage in that moment, knowing the climate of the time?
It was a horrible time, and it was the time of the pretty police in Earl's Court entrapping people and prosecuting them.
Yeah.
It was the time of the Customs and Excise raid on Gay's the Word bookshop. It was the time of the firebombing of Capital Gay's offices in London. It was not an easy time. And you have to remember also that when I was first elected the year before in 1983, I had a majority of 363 votes. So
Yeah.
it was a wafer thin majority. And nonetheless, I knew that at some point I wanted to say something about myself.
Yeah.
um, I had seen a colleague who wasn't out, who was gay, um, who was being hounded by the press, and he had people rummaging through his dustbins. He had people sitting in cars outside his block of flats all night long, recording who was going in and out. Um, I, I, I didn't want to have to go through the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I just decided that the way to stop the intrusion was to tell the story yourself.
Mm.
And by telling the story yourself, you remove all the tittle tattle
Yeah.
from it. And so it eventually proved for me. And the moment that I did it, because I'd been thinking for about a year, at some point I have to say something, but the only question was when would be the right moment. And the city of Rugby had taken the decision, it had just changed political control, and it had taken the decision to remove sexual orientation from the list of things that they would not discriminate against in their employment policy.
Right.
Um, so effectively, they were saying, we do not want LGBT people coming to work for Rugby Council.
Yeah.
And there was a big rally and march called for a Saturday lunchtime in the middle of Rugby. And because I had said supportive things about lesbian and gay rights, the organisers invited me to go up and speak. And I can remember the meeting had already started when I arrived. I had gone up on the train, and I remember writing a very boring speech on the train. And I walked into the hall. There were about 1,000 people there. The meeting had already started. And as I walked up to take my place on the platform, I just thought, this is the place to do it. because the issue here is all about how anyone, no matter what their sexual orientation happens to be, uh, can do an equally good job as anyone else working for Rugby Council.
Yeah.
And I just thought, actually, exactly the same applies to MPs.
Yeah.
And so it was a spur of the moment decision. It was about 10 minutes before I was due to stand up. It was 10 of the scariest minutes of my life.
I bet.
Uh, my knees were literally knocking together. And I stood up and I began my speech by saying, my name is Chris Smith. I'm the Labour MP for Islington South and Finsbury, and I'm gay. At which point, the entire audience got to their feet and gave me a standing ovation. It is the only time I've ever had a standing ovation 20 seconds into a speech. Um, but I have to say, I have never regretted that moment for a single instant ever since.
Mm. What was the feeling as you stepped off stage? There must have been was there a feeling of a sense of relief, a weight off your shoulders? Was there an anxiety of, what have I just done? Like, kind of, what was the feeling as you walked off that stage?
There was certainly a what have I just done, because no one had ever done this
No.
before. Um, and I remember for the following week, there was quite a lot of coverage in the papers the following day. But for the following week, I got letters from people all around the country. Now, this was way before the days of social media, so
Yeah.
people wrote letters. And uh, some of the letters said, congratulations, good on you, well done. But I think the letters which meant the most were the ones that said, thank you, what you've said has made things easier for me.
Yeah.
And if I was able, by what I said, to make things just a little bit easier for people, especially young people up and down the country, it was worth it.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. And it's what people need, right? I often say you can't be what you can't see. And I think people need to be able to see people being successful and open and authentic in order to know they can also do so. What was the reaction in Parliament from both colleagues and public when you kind of had to go back, I'm assuming relatively quickly afterwards, to Parliament?
This was on a Saturday. On the Monday, I walked into the House of Commons. Everyone knew. There were some people who should have known better, who scuttled past me in the corridor, averting their eyes. But the vast majority of colleagues were really supportive and warm and helpful about it. And especially Neil Kinnock was the leader of the Labour Party at the time. He was really supportive. And my favourite moment was on the Monday afternoon. I was standing in the queue in the members' tea room to get a cup of tea. There were MPs sitting around all over the place. And Edwina Currie, who was a very
Yeah.
ferociously feisty Conservative MP, previous health minister, um, came barging in to the tea room. She came marching up to me, and in a very loud voice, she said, "Chris, I hear you've come out. Well done." And
Wow.
turned on her heel and marched out. And I loved her forever afterwards because of that.
That's amazing. That's incredible. I think what's interesting, though, if we think about that time period, is just a few years later, Section 28 would be introduced. And Section 28 comes up a lot on Queer Talk. Quite a few members of or previous guests have grown up through Section 28, went to school through Section 28. You were one of the only openly gay voices in Parliament when Section 28 was introduced.
I was the only openly
Okay.
gay.
Can you take us back to that moment then and how it felt both personally and professionally? And then I would love to get your perspective on what, if any, you think the lasting damage of that legislation has been on LGBTQ plus people in Britain.
Well, of course, it was a clause that was added to a local government bill, initially proposed by a group of Tory backbenchers, but then endorsed by the Thatcher government. And it labelled any LGBT person and any LGBT relationship as second class. And it was a deeply offensive bit of legislation. We, of course, eventually were able to repeal it in the early 2000s. But while it was on the statute book, no prosecution was ever brought under it, but it nonetheless had a chilling effect. And it meant that, for example, a teacher in a school, if a kid came up to them and said, "I am really worried, I think I may be gay," of course, what a teacher ought to be able to do in such circumstances is to sit the kid down and say, "This is perfectly all right. It's perfectly normal. There are lots of people like you, and we will love you and support you, whatever you happen to be." But no teacher under Section 28 was able to do that. They had to say, "Oh, I'm afraid I can't talk about that." And that chilling effect on the ability to guide and nurture children, that was really detrimental. And when it was when the legislation was going through Parliament, there were a number of us fighting very hard against it. I can remember having to sit through the most dreadful, offensive, horrible speeches from some of the supporters of Section 28. They were all about how gay people were a threat to children, and it was all about perversion and so on. Really horrible, offensive stuff that people were coming out with. But I remember there was one moment of real hope in all of this, and it was when there was a particularly Neanderthal Tory on his feet, man called Nicholas Winterton, making a speech about Section 28. And I stood up to intervene on him and made a point. And as I sat down, he looked across the chamber at me and he began his response by saying, "The House has learned to listen to the honourable gentleman," pointing at me, "with respect when he talks about these matters." But, and he then went on to disagree with me. But the fact that he felt he had to put in that little bit about respect showed me that we had made a tiny little step of progress, because he was no longer able to talk in windy generalizations about gay people because there, sitting in front of him, was one of the people he was talking about.
Yeah. It must have been incredibly hard, or maybe it wasn't because you are such a professional, but it must have been very hard to remain professional in those moments when people are stood up saying such horrible things about you and your community. How did you kind of come up, protect that part of you from what you were having to listen to?
You to a certain extent you have to let it wash over you, and
Mm,
you just have to know that it's wrong and it's evil and it's offensive, uh, but uh, uh, just sit through it, and then stand up and try and make a coherent argument against what they've been saying.
yeah.
Quite difficult.
I think I would struggle. Obviously, the UK's first openly gay MP, but then in 1997, you joined Tony Blair's cabinet and became the world's first openly gay cabinet member. What did that moment mean to you?
Well, the rather wonderful thing that happened when I was appointed to the cabinet was no one noticed that
Okay.
I was the first openly gay cabinet minister in the world. And that really did show me that we had made progress,
Mm,
because it was no longer something really remarkable. It was just taken in its stride by the media and all the political commentators. And that, of course, is how it ought to be. Um, there were two other gay but not openly gay members of the cabinet in that first Blair administration. Um, and one of them did come out to a great to-do in the press. One of them never did come out, and but nonetheless, everyone knew that he was gay.
okay.
But it it was. It was a remarkable first, and particularly remarkable because it didn't raise an awful lot of comment.
Yeah, that is interesting. And as you say, that almost should be the way it is, that it shouldn't be groundbreaking. It was groundbreaking and it was incredible. What was that period of your life like then, whilst kind of serving under Tony Blair and in his government?
The what we were able to do, of course, was bring in a whole raft of change for LGBT related legislation.
Yeah.
The first thing we did was to equalize the age of consent, and then we got rid of Section 28, and then we had equal access to goods and services, and then we were able to reform the way in which the diplomatic service and the armed services operated. And then we were able to bring in civil partnerships. And that whole raft of legislation, um, I remember Tony Blair's office was really nervous at the outset. Oh, what are our working class pensioner voters going to think
Right.
about a Labour government that does this? Um, and we eventually managed to persuade them that if the if two young men brought a case to the European Court of Human Rights, and if the European Court found against the UK, then the government would legislate. And that is precisely what happened. Two very brave young men, assisted by Stonewall, went to the European Court, took the government to court, won the case, and then Blair was able to say, "We have to do this." And he not only brought in equalisation legislation in the House of Commons. But then when the House of Lords threw it out, he invoked the Parliament Act to force it through the House of Lords in the subsequent year. And of course, when the legislation actually came into force, the roof didn't fall in, and the working class pensioner voters weren't the slightest bit concerned about
No.
what was happening. And everyone sort of thought this is rather a good thing. And after that, it was easy to persuade his office to allow us to do everything else that we wanted to do.
Yeah, it's an incredibly, I mean, obviously he went on to get elected a couple more times after that. So it's an incredibly important message, actually, I think, because I think we sometimes feel like we have to pander to a certain vocal minority. Then actually, I think what you'll find, and what I hope, is that the vast majority of people just want people to be able to live their lives with equality. So I think seeing that and knowing it didn't, as you said, the roof didn't fall in, hell didn't freeze over, life continued, and, the government continued to be successful.
Absolutely. And in some ways, I think ordinary people were way ahead of the politicians on
Yeah.
this. And one of the reasons it became easy to bring in all the legislative change that we did was that it wasn't so much that public figures like politicians and actors had come out. It was that ordinary people in their family, amongst their friends, in their neighborhood, in their workplace, had come out to their friends and had said, yes, I'm one of those. And everyone had begun to realize that these were perfectly normal, decent, ordinary people. And that changed public attitudes enormously.
Yeah. But I think what you need is people like yourself who are a voice in that room, right? And often what I talk about is the importance of diversity from a business perspective and at a leadership level from a business perspective. You could argue there's no higher leadership team in the UK anyway than the cabinet. Why is it so important, therefore, that we have diversity of people and background in our cabinets?
uh, uh, because the cabinet must reflect the spectrum of people within the nation as a whole. And the one of the real arguments for diversity, which is under enormous threat especially in the United States at the moment. It's also a bit under threat here because there are many companies and organizations that are taking their lead from the Trump assault on DEI in the US. Um, uh, the One of the main purposes of promoting diversity is to say, if we want all the available talents in our organizations, in our companies, in our country, we need to appreciate and celebrate difference.
Mm.
And there will be many people who don't look like you, who don't behave like you, who are different. And we need to welcome those people because they will have a lot to offer that you don't.
Yeah. I think it's such an important message, especially right now, as you say. We are seeing things being stripped back in the United States. And unfortunately, that often kind of does have a knock on effect here in the UK. And it's definitely something we're seeing from a business perspective. You continued to break new ground and pioneer and be a vocal member of the community. And in 2005, you revealed that you were HIV positive. What made you decide to share that publicly? And what impact do you think that openness had on the community and on society as a whole?
Well, I was first diagnosed with HIV many years before, in 1988. And for many years, I thought, actually, this is nobody's business. Um, I told a few friends, I told my then partner, of course, but I didn't say anything publicly because it wasn't affecting my ability to do my job at all. And then in 2003, a journalist from the Sunday Times phoned me up and said, I want to talk about your health. And I knew immediately what it was that they were wanting to do. And so I said, well, if you want to do that, then I want to speak with your editor. And within 20 minutes, the editor of the Sunday Times, who was John Witherow at the time, had phoned me up. And I said to him, you do realize, of course, that revealing someone's personal health details without their permission is in flagrant breach of the editorial code of conduct. And I don't want you to say anything at the moment. What I will say, I said to him, is at some point I will want to say something about this. And when I do, I will do it with the Sunday Times. And he, in a remarkable moment of ethical journalism, he didn't publish anything at that point. And when 2 years later, Nelson Mandela had made a speech at his son's funeral. His son had died of AIDS, and he made this rather wonderful speech saying, we must stop hiding this. We must come out and talk about it. We must make it public. We must address the stigma that comes with HIV and an HIV diagnosis. And I just thought, well, perhaps I ought to say something now. And so I phoned up the Sunday Times and I said, I want now to go public. And they literally cleared the front page and made a big splash of it. And I then did a whole series of interviews through the Sunday. And I was making 2 points. The first was what I hope I've been able to demonstrate is that it is possible to live with HIV and make a perfectly worthwhile contribution to society and work whilst you are HIV positive. And secondly, I said, in a perverse kind of way, I've been lucky because I've had HIV in a country with a National Health Service, with medical expertise, with answers to the virus, and we mustn't forget that there are thousands of people around the world who aren't in that lucky position, and we need to think about and help to support them as well. And I have to say the coverage, with the exception of one article in the Daily Mail on the Monday, with that one exception, the coverage was remarkably constructive and positive. And the finest moment was on the Monday morning. I walked into my office in the House of Commons, and there was a little note on my desk saying, please ring Mr. Mandela, and a telephone number. And so I dialed this number. It was a South African number. And picking up the phone at the other end was Nelson Mandela, who said, I just wanted to say thank you for saying what you have, and it makes a real difference. And that moment almost made the whole thing worth it.
Yeah, that's incredible. What an amazing, amazing individual to have spoke to. What an amazing, amazing thing for you to do. I think to your first point, it is that continual work to remove the stigma, and we still see it today. Most recently, on I Kissed a Boy on the BBC, one of the contestants, Adam, spoke about his HIV positive status and just kind of the importance of removing so much of the stigma that still exists, because so many of us grew up through the 80s and the 90s where there was this impression of HIV in a certain light. Now we need to help do all the work to kind of remove that and recognize that people can, as you said, live healthy, happy, productive lives. And that's just so incredibly important.
And of course, for a long time, anyone with HIV was fighting two diseases, was fighting the virus itself and everything that it was doing inside you, but also fighting the stigma that came with it. And that has eased a little bit, but not wholly. And we still have to fight the stigma and the prejudice that comes with it.
Yeah, completely agree. Right at the start of this conversation, you mentioned your time at the University of Cambridge. And in July, you were elected Chancellor of the University of Cambridge. Can you talk to me about what that role entails and kind of, I guess, what you hope to achieve in that work?
Well, all the real work is done by the Vice Chancellor.
Okay.
The Chancellor sort of floats over the top, and but the duties are largely ceremonial. But you have a duty and an opportunity to be a voice and an advocate for the university and for higher education more generally. And of course, higher education, especially across the other side of the Atlantic, is under real threat at the moment. Academic freedom is at real risk. And freedom of speech, which is what a university has to be all about. What we're seeing across the Atlantic is everyone talking about freedom of speech, but what they mean is only one particular kind of freedom of speech. And anyone who disagrees with that is rubbished and traduced.
Okay.
And we need to protect academic freedom. We need to protect debate and discussion and the search for evidence and truth. And the Chancellor of the University of Cambridge can raise a voice for doing that. You are the Queen, you're not the Prime Minister, so you don't actually make decisions about what the university can and can't do, but you can set the tone and the culture and the atmosphere of the place, and that's something I very much hope to be able to do.
Yeah. And it's so important, right? To your point, if we think about what we've just been discussing, being a voice can be so incredibly important and can really help shape, as you say, even if you can't make the change yourself, helping shape perceptions and shape opinions is incredibly important.
And rather remarkably, amongst the 10 candidates for the chancellorship, there were 3 openly gay candidates. One, of course, was John Brown, who has a troubled history in BP, and but one was Sandy Toksvig, who ran a very feisty and open campaign. And I'm delighted to say that she came third, and virtually all of her votes transferred to me in the final stage of the vote.
That's amazing. We talked a lot about kind of the political climate throughout your career, and I've suggested that the current political climate, as it relates to the trans community, feels reminiscent of the climate in the 80s and 90s for the gay community. As someone that was clearly just at the forefront of change during that time, do you feel that's a fair comparison?
I think it's entirely fair. Um, and I really do despair of the way in which the position of trans people has been weaponized and labeled um, uh, on both sides of the argument. And I really want to knock everyone's heads together and say, for heaven's sake, we are talking about individual human beings here. And very often, these are human beings who are going through real challenge and trauma and difficulty. And our job is to support them and help them. It's not to label them and turn them into a political battleground.
Yeah.
And I just hope that over the course of the next few years, we can get to a position of real equality and support for trans people. I have to say the EHRC is not helping at the moment, but we need to get better at understanding what someone who is transitioning or has transitioned really needs in terms of support and facilities.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, so many people, much like we talked about through the 80s and 90s, people just want to live their lives, and they want to thrive, and they want to be able to live their authentic self. And that's not a threat to anyone else. And in fact, it's actually those individuals that are actually more threat than anyone else. So we do all need to come together. We do need to protect them. We started this conversation talking about you as a young person, so young Chris. If you could give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be? And would it be different if I said, what advice would you give to a young LGBTQ plus person today?
It would be exactly the same advice, and it would be, don't be scared. Be self-confident about who you are and what you are, and go out and express that amongst your friends in the world outside. Um, I've had the privilege for the last 10 years of being head of a college at Cambridge, and I have gone out of my way to try and make sure that we welcome and embrace the any student who is LGBTQ plus. Who is worried about who or what they might be, and making sure that it's a welcoming environment and it's a supportive environment is something I very consciously tried to do. And many of our young students have said to me, thank you, because it has provided me with a really safe environment, and it's given me the courage to be who I am. And I hope that not just in the little bubble of a Cambridge college, but more broadly in society as a whole, we can get to that stage.
Yeah, I love that. Don't be scared and be brave. It's such an important message. Chris, thank you so much for being on the podcast. But on this podcast, we often talk about those people who have laid the groundwork and fought the fights for people like me to not only live but thrive as our authentic selves. And you are one of the reasons that today we have an openly gay leader of a major political party, Zach Polanski. So from many of us in the community, thank you so much for everything you did and continue to do for the LGBTQ plus community.
Well, thank you. You are much too kind in what you say, but if I've made a tiny little contribution at some point over the past 40 years, then it's been worth doing.